Trump threatens to skip NATO summit if Europe fails to increase defense spending. The context leading to the demands from the U.S. toward NATO member states. For many years, the U.S. has repeatedly complained that NATO members have failed to meet the defense spending commitment of at least 2% of GDP as set by the alliance's goals. Under President Donald Trump, this pressure has escalated significantly. Starting in early 2025, President Trump demanded that NATO allies not only meet the 2% GDP threshold, but increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, citing rising threats from Russia, China, and other global security challenges. This demand was formally conveyed through the U.S. ambassador to NATO, along with a warning from Trump that he might not attend the upcoming NATO summit unless allies committed to raising their defense budgets. According to Trump, higher defense spending is necessary to share the security burden with the U.S. and to strengthen NATO's military capacity. This move placed heavy pressure on European countries, already grappling with post-pandemic economic struggles, climate change challenges, and various domestic issues. European responses. In response to President Trump's demands, European NATO countries offered varied reactions, mostly marked by caution and concern. Germany. The German chancellor expressed concern about the 5% GDP target, calling it unrealistic and unsustainable given budget constraints and other priorities like healthcare, education, and climate change. Germany reaffirmed its plan to gradually increase defense spending, but stated it could not meet the U.S. demand in the short term. France. The French president reacted more strongly, saying NATO should not be forced into one-sided orders from Washington. He called for a more autonomous NATO and stressed the importance of joint decision-making and mutual respect within the alliance. Poland, Baltics, some Eastern European countries like Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania supported the U.S. request, viewing it as an opportunity to bolster security against the Russian threat. They committed to maintaining at least 2% GDP defense spending and moving toward higher targets. Spain, Italy. These countries indicated difficulty in meeting the demand due to public debt burdens and post-COVID-19 economic crises, but pledged to maintain reasonable defense investments. Some European leaders warned that the U.S.'s excessive demands could cause internal rifts within NATO, undermine mutual trust, and damage the alliance's credibility. They emphasized the need for dialogue, cautioning against turning NATO into a financial alliance solely based on spending levels. NATO's proposed solutions. Faced with U.S. pressure, NATO proposed several balancing measures aimed at addressing defense spending demands while maintaining internal cohesion. 1. Flexible spending roadmap. NATO reaffirmed the minimum 2% GDP defense spending target, but allowed for longer timelines based on each country's capacity, enabling budget-limited nations to gradually meet goals without sacrificing social spending. 2. Increased non-financial contributions. NATO encouraged members to contribute more to non-budget-intensive activities like troop deployments, intelligence sharing, logistical support, and peacekeeping missions. 3. Diversified defense investments. NATO promoted investments in modern defense capacities such as cybersecurity, hybrid warfare defense, space technology, and artificial intelligence, areas requiring lower budgets but offering high strategic value. 4. Enhanced European defense cooperation. NATO endorsed initiatives like the European Defense Fund and permanent structured cooperation to share costs among EU members, avoid duplication, and enhance Europe's defense autonomy. 5. Internal political dialogue. The NATO Secretary-General stressed the need for ongoing political dialogue among members to resolve disagreements and prevent financial disputes from harming alliance unity. Latest developments from the U.S. administration. President Donald Trump may skip the upcoming NATO summit if European members fail to commit to a substantial increase in defense spending, Germany's Der Spiegel reported on May 3rd. According to classified reports from German officials in Brussels cited by Der Spiegel, U.S. Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker repeatedly demanded that European countries spend at least 5% of GDP on defense, more than double the alliance's previous 2% goal. Whitaker warned that if countries fail to meet the new demand, Trump might refuse to attend the NATO summit scheduled in The Hague at the end of June. The German magazine also reported that during a call with German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius last month, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth conveyed Washington's view that European allies must take primary responsibility for Europe's defense. Hegseth urged Germany to fulfill its defense spending commitments, according to a Pentagon-released summary of the call. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio similarly told the Free Press last week that NATO today was the U.S. and a group of underperforming partners. Defense Secretary Hegseth declared that the era of the U.S. being the sole guarantor of Europe's security is over. It's time for Europe to step up, invest in its military, and lead. He also stated the 2% GDP defense target was no longer sufficient. Last month, President Trump announced he might consider withdrawing part or all of the 84,000 U.S. troops stationed in Europe, arguing that Washington was bearing most of Europe's security costs while receiving little in return. According to NATO estimates reported by the BBC, as of 2024, only 23 of the alliance's 32 member states have met the 2% GDP defense spending commitment made in 2014. Meanwhile, the U.S. currently spends about 3.5% of GDP on defense and remains NATO's largest contributor. Impacts and concerns for NATO cohesion. 1. Increased internal tensions. U.S. pressure, especially under Trump, has deepened divisions among NATO members. Many see the U.S. as imposing financial demands beyond their economic capacity, threatening the alliance's foundation of consensus and burden sharing. 2. Doubts about U.S. security commitment. Statements implying the U.S. might not defend allies who don't meet spending commitments have raised doubts about U.S. commitment to Article 5, collective defense, weakening strategic trust in U.S. leadership. 3. Imbalance in security priorities. Some European nations worry that ramping up military spending under U.S. pressure could divert funds from non-traditional security challenges like cybersecurity, climate change, and migration. 4. Threats to internal political unity. U.S. pressure could accelerate European defense autonomy initiatives, e.g., PESCO, European Defense Fund, creating distance from NATO if EU countries seek to reduce reliance on Washington. 5. Damage to NATO's image and credibility. Public disputes over spending have eroded NATO's image as a unified alliance, potentially emboldening adversaries like Russia and China to exploit internal divisions. Summary: President Trump's threat to skip the NATO summit if European allies don't increase defense spending has triggered tensions within the alliance. While some nations have pledged to raise spending, the 5% GDP demand is viewed as unrealistic and risks undermining NATO unity. Seeking compromise solutions, as proposed by the NATO Secretary General, could help ease tensions and preserve alliance stability.